Well, if we can, let's kind of transition and talk about something related to mental disorders.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about the different mental disorders that we've talked about, it seems most of them have an emotional component to them. Mm-hmm. And you already alluded to that pretty directly, mm-hmm. that there is an emotional component as we think about how we're made in the systems. Are emotions the problem?
No, emotions are not the problem. Can emotions be part of the problem? Yes.
Okay.
I get concerned when I hear people talk about as our emotions as being bad and or not important, irrelevant to our experience. I would argue that as being created in the image of God, that emotions are part of our created nature. God himself has emotions. And scripture is pretty clear that God experiences those emotions. We hear times where God is angry or he's jealous, or we see Jesus in the garden in despair. We see him weep when he loses a friend.
Zephaniah 3:17 says God sings songs of joy,
yes,
which is an emotional reality of God as
Absolutely.
well, it seems like. Yeah.
And so we have a God who feels, right? That there's something about emotion then that is part of our lived experience, mm-hmm. if you will. In that, I would propose that emotion for us serves a few different purposes. First, emotion can be an alarm system. Right. So when we are functioning in our daily life and then something is not going well, our emotions kick in, right? And we feel fear, or we feel anxiety, or we feel sadness. And those emotions tell us, hey, something's not right. Pay attention. There could be danger up here, or there's a loss. You've lost something that's meaningful to you. So they're important for us to really, I think, pay attention to. Emotions also help us to enjoy this world that God has given us. Mm-hmm. Pleasure and awe and love and joy, all of those things, peace, are all positive emotions that help us to really enjoy this lived experience. The third thing that I would argue, probably the third reason, and probably the most important reason that we have emotions, is that emotions are the basis of relationship. Without emotions, we cannot attach to other people. We cannot grow with other people. We can't feel close to other people. And so emotions facilitate relationships. And because we are made to be in relationship, right? That's where our fulfillment comes from, being part of a community. Emotions are essential for that connectedness.
Well, let me ask you this, since I have you here. Here's a way that I've thought about it. You can tell me if this is bad or not so bad. I don't know. I've often thought about emotions as speaking the truth about our reality. Mm-hmm. So sometimes people might say emotions lie, and emotions might be rooted in a lie. So we listen to them and then we kind of move backwards and say, what's the lie that might be causing us to feel this way? Mm-hmm. But in a sense, emotions are truth tellers.
Yes.
Because they're telling us the truth about the lies we may believe, even if those emotions are coming from lies. And of course, not all emotions come from lies. But the reality is we can think about it that way and maybe realize that emotions are something we need to pay attention to, mm-hmm. precisely because they can help us if we maybe in a discipling relationship with someone else can maybe get to where those are maybe rooted in a lie or rooted in the truth, and then we can navigate that together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Emotions may not line up with external reality, but generally they're a pretty good thermometer of internal reality.
Yeah.
Right. And so they are going to tell me something about how I'm processing an event or how I feel in relationship. Now, how I'm processing an event may be very wrong, right? Or how I feel in a relationship may be really inaccurate based on what that relationship is. But the emotions are my window into seeing where I'm at.
Yeah.
Right? The other difficulty with emotions would be if they're turned up or turned down too much. So sometimes it's not, the emotion is appropriate. It's appropriate in this moment that I'm angry, or it's appropriate in this moment that I'm sad. But if I'm more angry or more sad than the situation warrants, that's when I would say we've crossed the line from a healthy emotion to an unhealthy emotion, right? Or if the emotion is muted. If this is a situation in which most people would be angry and I feel nothing, or most people would feel joy and I feel nothing, that's another way that I would say, there may be some kind of mental illness there.
Yeah.
Or if the emotion that I'm feeling is completely wrong for the situation.
And I've heard it said emotions are really important because without emotions, there's no movement. In fact, the word is emotion, which in clinically depressed people, you tend to see there's a lack of movement in their life, right? There's kind of a shutting down because the emotion is not there. So I think it is really important in the church that we understand the role of emotion. Well, first of all, God has emotion and created in the image of God. He's gifted us with that as we think about that. And so we need to pay attention to it, but we need to navigate that carefully as we think about how we process emotions.
Yes.
Is definitely important.
So one of the things that I would do in a therapy room with someone around emotions is I want to teach them to be mindful of the emotion and then to question the emotion. So we would practice skills where we would help someone almost to see the emotion objectively. And so they're separating themselves from it a little bit. And in that way, they can choose whether or not they want to engage it. For example, I may feel sad, and so I may be aware that there's a sadness in me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to step into the sadness and let it overcome me. I actually have some choice in the degree to which I step into that emotion. So that's one of the things I want to teach people how to do. The other thing I want to teach them how to do is to question that emotion. And so if we use the W questions, I would start with, and this is a weird way to say it, but who is the emotion? What is this that I'm actually feeling? And we will see some people have a really hard time with that basic step of labeling their emotion. And if we can't name it, then it's really hard for us to express it and talk about it. And what then happens is that it comes out sideways and it comes out in problematic behaviors and experiences and that sort of thing. And so I may work with someone for a while on just putting a name. Who's the emotion that you're feeling right now? And then I want to ask, questions. How does it feel? And so I want to help my client begin to be able to talk about how that emotion feels, how it feels in their physical body, how it feels in their, psychological body, how it affects relationships, how it affects their relationship with God. And then from there, I want to, really ask, we could say, when did it start? And that's another way to say that is, what was the trigger? What was the event that started it? And then what are the thoughts that go along with it? Because generally when we see an emotion, even if the person isn't aware of underlying thoughts, there are underlying thoughts that tend to go with that. And eventually that's where I'm going to get to begin to help people see reality more accurately. That's where I want to go. But if I'm not doing the other pieces first, we're never going to be able to get there. Another thing I might explore is, when in your past have you felt like this? Because a lot of times in the moment when we have an emotion, particularly a strong emotion, and we notice, wow, I am feeling this more strongly than the situation warrants, it's because it's connecting to something similar in our past. some kind of wound that we have that hasn't been healed is getting activated here in the moment.
And certainly we don't need to go through this, but there's actually explanations of that if we understand how the brain works with memory and all of that as well,
Yes.
how that would actually play out and why that is actually true, that could be the case.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Those neural pathways.
Yeah.
The other thing I would add here is one of the ways to judge our emotions, if you will, or maybe the better way to say that is to evaluate our emotions, is what is the emotion telling me, and does it line up with Scripture? Does it line up with other Christian witness? Is this consistent with God and what He desires for us? Do the other voices in my life, my Christian friends, are they seeing this the same way that I am? Because what we know, right, is that our emotions, because they're based on our internal reality and not necessarily the external reality, they can convince us that something is true and right, even when that's not what the truth is.
Yeah, that's really good. And I think it's fair to say, what you're saying there in all these principles that you're giving us and tools that you're giving is how we can regulate our emotions with the help of someone else.
Absolutely.
In a discipling relationship rather than be controlled by our emotions. We certainly don't want to be controlled by them in a sense of they overrun us.
Right.
And we have no choice or no will that we can exercise in the midst of that. But they are significant and we have to listen to them, and we can't minimize the role of emotion in our life as well. And finding that balance is so important in how we actually navigate in the church and we work with people, especially with mental disorders.
And some of the new neuroscience is showing that our nervous systems are actually open systems. And in order to become a closed system, they require a relationship with another person. Yeah. Right. And we regulate our emotions in the presence of another person. So, for example, someone comes into my office and they're distressed. My having regulated emotions will help calm them down.
Yeah. So co-regulation.
Exactly.
Is the word we might use there. Yeah.
And so I would argue that's a really important part of discipleship. If I'm working with somebody, if I'm engaged in that discipling relationship with them, part of what needs to happen is I need to be in a healthy place because my ability to regulate my own emotions will help that person begin to regulate theirs. Yeah.
And the risk is always going into an extremes. Of course, emotionalism is not what we want on the one hand,
right?
But completely denying and ignoring our emotions is not what we want on the other hand. Exactly. And somewhere we need to find that, not in the extremes and live there, but to find that balance as we think about how we've been created in the image of God. Right. Yeah.
I know that I am particularly thankful for those moments in my faith where I have this emotional connection with God, so in worship or in prayer, and you have that emotional high, and there's just nothing like it, right? But I think there's something in us that begins to think that God only exists or is only present in our lives in those moments. And so I think back to a metaphor from a friend, Billy Goodson, who talked about this. And this idea, if you will, that we're standing in the ocean and we're waiting for the waves to come. And we're so excited every time a wave of emotion comes, because we know that in this wave, God is present, right? And it's exciting and it's beautiful and there's energy and it's good. And then when it passes, we're waiting for the next one. But we forget to look down and see that we're standing in a sea of grace the entire time, right? Wow. And God is present in those quiet moments just as much as he's present in those emotional moments.
You're still in the ocean.
You're still in the ocean.
The grace of God in either case.
Yes.
That's beautiful.